Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
The Steele's Flatback Pontic is available for all of the maxillary and mandibular teeth, with the exception of the mandibular incisors. This demonstration is going to show the adaptation of a Steele's Flatback porcelain Pontic in replacing a maxillary lateral incisor tooth. You may remember that the Steele's Flatback, which we have an enlarged model of here, consists of the porcelain or resin facing here and the metallic backing with its central post on which the porcelain facing slides to position and is cemented. As the device is provided by the manufacturer, it is in standard size and shape and requires adaptation both of the porcelain facing to the individual clinical case and then of the metal backing to adapt to the modified porcelain facing. And then, of course, as you remember, the lingual surface here is waxed onto the metal backing for the particular case in mind, and then the backing, along with the lingual wax up, is sprued, invested, and cast. So the stages that we're going to go through today then, the technical procedures which we go through today, are the adaptation of the porcelain facing, then the adaptation of the metal backing to that porcelain facing, and then finally the waxing of the lingual surface. In this demonstration we're going to adapt a Steele's Flatback facing to this model with the left maxillary lateral missing. Now the first step in doing this is to check the overall dimensions of the porcelain facing, and to do this it's convenient to place a little bit of utility wax on the lingual surface and then to place the porcelain facing in position here and to put it as near as possible in the situation where it will meet the requirements of the particular case. And I think you can see now that the facing as in position at the present time is in about the correct relations as far as the cervical area is concerned here, that the proximal dimension from mesial to distal is about right, that it is, if anything, long in the incisal, so that one of the major things in fitting this facing is a reduction in the overall length. Now we will be adapting to the alveolar ridge here and having to grind the cervical part of this facing, and as that is ground, it will of course enable the facing to seat higher in this situation. So the first step which we're going to do in adapting the facing to the alveolar ridge will at the same time be helping us in the major dimensional correction that has to be made in this particular facing. Now in order to adapt to the alveolar ridge, it's necessary to utilize a marker on the model and to pick up markings on the porcelain facing to indicate just exactly where to grind and adapt it. In order to keep our master model nice and clean, we have made a small duplicate just of that area with the missing tooth there. This was done by taking an alginate impression of the master model and then pouring that, in this case, in impression plaster so that it would set quickly and we don't have to wait a long time to get a duplicate model. So the adaptation of this facing then to the alveolar ridge will be done on this small model here in order to protect the master model and keep it in good condition. So now we take another piece of utility wax and transfer the facing to our little working model here and carefully position it so that it assumes the situation on this model which we want in a finished case. So it's necessary in doing this to give recognition to any sloping of the long axis of the facing here that may be necessary in relation to the other teeth, and to get it correctly positioned in relation to the arch of the teeth so that the incisal edge is going to fall in the same incisal plane as the other teeth, and identify that position by means of adapting the red utility wax on the lingual surface so that we can now take this away and then we can put it back again into essentially the same position like that. And we're now going to mark the alveolar ridge of this model in pencil, just with an ordinary number 2 pencil here, and then apply the facing to that, press it down into position, and it will pick up from there some of the lead pencil in the situation where it is touching the ridge. And I think perhaps you can see this situation here. There is just a small pencil mark just on the tip there. And by grinding that away, we'll enable the facing to seat down a little further. You'll notice that that surface is highly glazed at the present moment, and the pencil mark doesn't show too readily. As we grind it in adapting it, you'll find that subsequent pencil marks will show a little more readily. So be prepared in doing this not to get a good visibility on the first pencil mark. So we take a Dedico carborundum stone and just grind a little on that one spot where the pencil mark was, and then go back again to our working model, place the facing back onto the red utility wax, press it down into place, remove it from there, and look again for a pencil mark and grind accordingly. Now you may find from time to time that it's necessary to repencil the surface. It soon wears off here, and the addition of just a little more pencil on there, the seating of the facing down again, and then pull that off and look again at this surface. And I think you can see again some pencil marks just on the periphery, just around here. They're a little mixed in this time with some plaster because of the soft impression plaster that we have on this model. And so now we just adapt and grind away again on that surface. When the adaptation has been completed on the working model, the facing is transferred from the working model to the master model, and the adaptation checked in position on the master model. And I think you can see as you look at this facing on the master model now that not only have we got adaptation to the cervical, to the alveolar ridge, but notice that the facing is now much more correct so far as the length is concerned, so far as the incisal edge. Remember, there was a considerable extension of the incisal edge in the facing when we started, and that's now almost in line with what we want. This has been produced by grinding on the cervical end here. Nothing's been taken off the incisal edge as yet. The grinding here and the adaptation here has reduced the length. So now the next thing to do is to correct the incisor-cervical length completely by grinding on the incisal edge. And to do that, we'll take the facing off the model and make the necessary grinding adjustment, and then try it back in position. And the final stages in this adaptation of the incisor-cervical length are probably best done with the facing on the model, because there are critical things in relation to the slant of the incisal edge and the rounding of the incisal margins and so on that are best done in relation to the adjacent teeth. So the final grinding here is best done on the model itself. Take care that the facing doesn't shift in position in the wax whilst doing this, and it may be wise to stop from time to time just to check that it's still seating correctly in the cervical area as it previously was, and then check the incisal length. You can see, I think, that we're getting closer now to what we're aiming at, that it's in line, but still perhaps just a little bit on the long side. We're getting the same characteristics, the square angle on the mesial and the somewhat rounded angle on the distal to match the tooth on the other side. So we'll do a little more adjusting with the facing in position on the model. When the incisor-cervical length has been adjusted, the next step is to take a look at the proximal embrasures on the labial surface. And these are quite characteristic both from the functional point of view of self-cleansing and also from the aesthetic point of view. In this particular case, the prefabricated facing is about correct for this particular situation, and I think you can see that these embrasures and these situations here give adequate access to the interproximal tissues, and that they're not being overcrowded. Were this a posterior tooth, of course, it would be customary to open these considerably. In the anterior region, we give preference to aesthetics of the case and maintain this present position because it matches that of the opposite side quite nicely. So there's actually no particular adjustment of these embrasures that's necessary on this particular case. The step following that is to take a look at the labial contour of these teeth, and in a close-up shot of this, I think we can probably focus in on a profile of the labial surface so that we can look at the characteristics of it and see if they match those of the opposing side. The natural tooth in this particular case is a very flat labial surface, and I don't know whether you can see it or not, but the facing, the porcelain facing here, has something of a marked labial ridge running down this area here. And that is noticeable, I think, in the light reflections that you get from that surface, which don't quite match in with those of the adjacent teeth, as you can see. So we're going to flatten the labial surface of that tooth by grinding it in order to change the labial characteristics, and of course later on it will be necessary to repolish it. So we'll take the facing off and grind the labial surface to take out that marked labial ridge that's present on this one, and to flatten the surface somewhat to coincide with that of the natural teeth in this case that we're endeavoring to match. Once this surface has been ground, of course, it will not, for the time being, give any strong light reflections, and it won't be until it's been finally polished that we'll be able to check on that particular aspect of it. Try the facing back again now, and look at it from the labial, and it's in a close view from the labial, which I'm not sure whether we can focus down on with the camera. Looking from the labial, you look down here and identify the absence of that strong labial ridge, which I think you can see has gone now. We've got a flat surface there that is more characteristic of the other side. And if you just look down on the incisal and change the angulation of that sort, you can follow all the way down the labial and see the characteristics. And I think as we do that, one notices a little tendency for the labial ridge still to be present in one area here, I think, on the distal. We haven't got it quite flattened there as much as it should be. So I'm going to grind a little bit more and increase that flattening up into that particular area where it was hadn't quite penetrated previously. It's not possible, I think, within the terms of this demonstration to identify all of the labial characteristics and the exact way of adjusting them, but I think your knowledge of tooth anatomy and your experience already in dealing with these things would enable you to translate what we're saying here into the practical case that you're doing. I think you can see that we've changed that labial contour somewhat now, and that it matches more closely with the adjacent one. Notice one thing at this point, that the incisal edge is rather thick and rather wide, and that leads us on to the next step, which we have to do in modifying and finishing the incisal edge there. And we have a diagram, I think, which will help me to put over that aspect. This diagram shows a labiolingual section through a Steele's flatback Pontic, in which this is the porcelain facing, and this is the gold backing. This represents the cross-section through the alveolar ridge, and we see here the adaptation of the porcelain facing to the ridge as we have achieved it. What we're now interested in is the finish of the incisal edge here. The standard facing, as provided by the manufacturer, has a very flat, square incisal edge to it. And were it used in that form, it would both look a little unusual and would also receive too great of stress as the Pontic was utilized in function. That is modified by thinning off the incisal edge, as you see here. So the next thing we're going to do is to grind in this area to develop this type of edge. Now, the finishing of the incisal edge is a thing which is divided partly between finishing the porcelain and partly in finishing the gold backing, as you might expect. And we'll refer to this diagram when we're adapting the metal backing. But notice at this time that the metal backing is developed, so the gold is just a little more prominent incisally than is the porcelain facing, so that any stresses falling on it hit first of all the gold, and the porcelain is to some degree protected. However, what we're going to do at the present time is to adapt this type of finish to that incisal edge on the porcelain, This we will deal with later in adapting the metal backing. So to return to our master model now, we're going to grind the labial surface in the incisal third region here and change that incisal edge to thin it down and adapt it to give the type of finish that we had on the diagram. The incisal edge has now been modified to conform with the design shown in our diagram. And the next step is to go on to the finishing of the cervical aspect of the Pontic facing. And I have some diagrams, I think, which will put over the concepts which underlie the next step before we do it on the porcelain facing itself. So let's take a look at the diagrams. This diagram represents the cervical end of a Steele's flatback facing. This is the porcelain, and this is the metal backing after the lingual surface has been waxed and cast. And if we left the porcelain facing in its present form, we would end up with the cervical end of this type, where the cement lute would be exposed along here and around there and across here. And so it's necessary to make some adjustments in this end in order to cover over this area here. And our next diagram indicates the nature of what we do. We make a modification in the cervical end of the porcelain by hollow grinding in this area here, which is enclosed by the dotted line, so that when this has been hollow ground in there, we can have an extension of our wax in the wax-up stage and later of gold in the casting, which comes forward here as an apron and covers over the end of the post and the various cement lute areas. You can see in this diagram how the hollow ground area, which we made at the cervical end of the porcelain, allows wax and subsequently gold to extend forward as an apron and cover over the end of the post and the cement lute and give a much more satisfactory and hygienic cervical end to the Pontic. The cervical of the Pontic facing is ground, hollow ground with the same grinding stone as used previously in adjusting the other surfaces. And the hollow grinding is created, as we saw on the diagram, to stay just short of the labial finishing edge of the Pontic. It remains now only to polish all those surfaces of the facing which have been cut, and this is done with rubber polishing wheels, with XXX silex on a lathe brush, and then finally with levigated alumina on a 3-inch cloth mop. Now, I'm not going to take time to demonstrate these procedures because I think they're well known to you, and we'll pick up the demonstration after the facing has been polished. The next step is to adjust the metal backing, and I think the 3 stages in doing this can be recognized easily on this enlarged model, which we looked at previously. The adaptation is generally carried out by taking a scriber and scribing a line around the backing, which is usually larger than the facing at this point of time. And then the facing is taken off and the backing either cut with shears or ground with carborundum stones, as the case may be, to correct it, to take it down to correct size. The first step is in the development of the incisal edge, then the development of the periphery, and finally the trimming of the cervical region here. So let's take a look first of all at the finishing of the incisal edge. You may remember that earlier we had a diagram which indicated the relationship between the porcelain and the gold at the incisal edge. And you may remember that we were attempting to ensure that the gold was a little more prominent than the porcelain. This is the diagram here. This is the gold backing. This is the porcelain. You remember that we finished the porcelain here to reduce the bulk of the edge. And now we want to develop the gold aspect of that by placing a bevel, about a 45-degree bevel, on the backing coming down in this direction so as that we can project this into the wax up and have gold just a little more prominent than the porcelain. So it's convenient, first of all, to develop the incisal edge there. And we can turn to the actual Pontic itself and work on that. The backing has been placed on the facing here and is just held in this pair of crown holders. And you can see that the backing is certainly longer in the incisal region. It's just a little wider on one periphery, and on the other periphery it's almost exact in length. So first of all, we'll develop the incisal, and we take a sharp instrument and just scribe a line across that edge so as to mark it. And now we can take off the backing from the facing, and with a pair of shears we can cut the backing approximately along that line. We'll leave it just a little longer than the mark so that we can have some metal there to trim and adjust to allow for excess metal sticking beyond the facing. Now I think perhaps on a close-up we can give you some idea as to how close that has been cut. Let's see if we can get a close-up shot on that incisal edge just to show the adjustment that's been made. You can see that although some of the excess has been cut back, it's still a little prominent, and that allows us to go along there now with the carborundum stone and cut it at an angle so that the gold will remain prominent. So we mount a heatless stone in the handpiece, and with the heatless stone just work along the incisal edge here, cutting in such a way that we'll develop a 45-degree bevel on the gold. Taking care, of course, not to cut or injure the porcelain along that edge. You can see here that the incisal part of the backing is now finished to the contour of the incisal edge of the porcelain, and yet the gold is just showing along there, which will enable us to develop the necessary incisal protection as we wax up the backing. The next thing we now have to do is to turn to the trimming of the periphery of the backing, that is on the mesial and the distal. And here a rather different situation exists, and the diagram which we're now going to look at I think helps put over this concept. Here we've got a diagram, cut it through. This represents the facing, and here is the backing, and there is the rod going up the center for retention. Here on the periphery, on the mesial and the distal, we finish the gold backing so it has a 45-degree bevel in this way. And the reason for that is that as we wax up, we want to be able to carry wax over and around that periphery for our backing in this way. So that 45-degree bevel which you see there is cut both on that side and on this. Now it's convenient sometimes in trimming these to trim them first of all like this, and then subsequently to put the 45-degree bevel on there. That enables the wax to come over there, means that the backing will not be exposed around the periphery, and you have one homogeneous piece of gold exposed on the margins of the Pontic in the region of the solder joint and so on. So we come back then to our Pontic backing here, and in trimming the periphery in this particular one where it's so close to being correct, we can take a carborundum stone and just carefully grind it back around the periphery to the necessary situation. If there is a considerable excess on the proximals, then it's sometimes convenient to scribe it and cut it with the shears. But where it's so small as this, it's equally convenient to trim it in this way. So we'll go round the periphery and grind it with this carborundum stone, and then we'll bevel it to the 45-degree angle. Although the bevel can be developed with the heatless stone when cutting the periphery back to contour, it's sometimes convenient to utilize a carborundum disc for the final adaptation of that 45-degree bevel around the backing, and this can conveniently be done with the facing out of position, and then by angling the disc correctly along here and very gently cutting down there, the 45-degree bevel can be developed on the proximal surfaces as we saw in the diagram. Just perhaps a little easier and a little more precise. Remember not to go around the incisal, of course, where the 45-degree bevel is in the opposite direction. The only remaining step now is to grind the cervical end of the backing where the post projects from the porcelain facing, and to take this down level with the rest of the porcelain into the countersunk area which we cut into the porcelain a little earlier. So again, with the heatless stone, this is just carefully and gently ground away to reduce the length. You can, if you like, put a scribe mark on it and reduce the bulk of this without the porcelain in place, and then do the final finishing and adaptation with a somewhat smaller wheel and with the facing back in position. This close-up shows the finished product so far as the adaptation of the cervical end of the backing is concerned, and I think you can see there that the post has been ground off level in the base of the hollow ground area which we cut in there, and you can see the backing coming up with a bevel in that situation. So that this is now ready for waxing, and we move on to that stage now. We need to go back to our original master model in order to do the wax up, and the facing, if you remember previously, was held in position, in the correct position, with red utility wax on the lingual surface, and perhaps I'll just put a little bit of that back again to take us back to that situation. Remember that we had the facing in position held here with the red utility wax. Now, as we come to wax up the backing, we now want to have access to the lingual surface, of course, but we do want the facing to remain in exactly the same position whilst we're doing the waxing up of the lingual surface of the backing. So what one does is to make a little template, which you see here, for the labial surface. And you recollect that the way of doing that is to put a separator on here, either microfilm or a soap solution over this surface here, to make a little mix of impression plaster, and then pour a small amount of the plaster over the two adjacent teeth and just around this area, stopping it so that the incisals are not covered because you want access to those. And in that way you make one of these small templates, which I'll put into position soon. Once you've made that template, you can then take away the lingual wax, and with the template in position, you can pop the facing down there with the backing on it, of course. Put the backing onto the facing. Place the template in position on the adjacent teeth, and then slide the facing into its little setting in the template there. And make sure that it's pressed completely down, and you look along the top so that you can see that it's adapted well in position, and so on. And then it's necessary to hold this in position, and usually a little sticky wax melted, and attach the template to the adjacent teeth, and also attach the facing itself to the template. I'm utilizing a spirit lamp for a source of heat here so that it's not too rapid at melting sticky wax. And a little more to the facing itself just to hold that in the correct position. So that when the sticky wax is hardened, it's possible now to turn round and work on the lingual surface of the backing and wax up in relationship to the adjacent teeth. It's a good thing to put a little microfilm on the adjacent teeth before doing the waxing on the backing, which will facilitate in removing those. And then go ahead and build up the usual lingual surface for an anterior pontic. The wax is built up on the lingual surface by any suitable waxing technique. And it's sometimes convenient when a reasonable amount of wax has been added and developed to contour, to remove the Pontic and the backing and the wax up from the model for the final shaping and contouring of the wax, and particularly in relation to waxing the part which extends into the cervical area in the undercut region. Say undercut region, I mean the hollow ground region of the cervical. The wax is allowed to harden, and then the interproximals can be carved. And the incisal edge developed, projecting the 45-degree angle from the gold backing so as to give yet a little more protection of the lingual to the incisal edge. The fully waxed backing with the Pontic facing is returned to the model and placed in position with the template as a final check of the contours, and is then ready for spruing and investing and casting. And perhaps if I take it out, I can possibly demonstrate to you two of the critical aspects of this. I think you can see perhaps here the extension of the gold backing forward in the incisal area so as to give incisal protection, as we discussed. And then perhaps on the cervical end here, you can see the extension of the wax forward into the undercut area, the hollow ground area in the cervical region there. Now, it's a good idea at this stage just to thicken the wax a little there after it's come out of position, because it's a very thin way for extending forward. Makes for better casting. It's just thickened, and then this is thinned down in the gold prior to cementing and facing on, so that we're now ready to go ahead and do the screwing of this, and take a sprue and just warm the end of it, and then apply it in the lingual cingulum area here. Next, the facing is removed from the backing, and here we have the backing without the facing. You can see the backing, you can see the incisal protection, you can see to the cervical extension, I think. And now this is ready for placing on the crucible former, and then investing and casting in the usual manner.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.